welcome back for part 2 of our look at brain anatomy and structure. Again, in this video, we're going to be focused on the diencephalon, the brainstem, and the cerebellum. And so let's go ahead and do this. Again, this is going to be a brief introduction into each of these areas. We're going to start with the diencephalon. And the diencephalon is made up of 3 substructures, if you would, or subdivisions. We have the thalamus, which is this structure right here. We have the hypothalamus, which is this region right here. And we have the epithalamus, which is this area right back here. And so our time together here is going to be spent on looking at the function of the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the epithalamus, at least as we're looking at the diencephalon. And then we'll move into the brainstem after that. And so the thalamus that we are seeing right here is responsible for sorting, editing, and relaying input. All right, so what do we mean by that? Well, impulses from the hypothalamus, all right, for regulating emotion and visceral function meaning from the abdominal cavity. Impulses from the cerebellum, all right, that helps to direct motor function. All right, that's going to go through the thalamus. And impulses for memory and sensory integration. All right, so again, you've got a visual cue that links to a memory. You've got a something that you smell, and we link that to a memory. All right, that all kind of flows through the thalamus. All right, so if we summarize what the thalamus is doing, it is mediating sensation, motor activity, cortical arousal, learning, and memory. All right, that's what it's doing. It's mediating all of that. And so kind of think of the thalamus as being that go-between between the cerebrum, the brainstem, and the cerebellum. All right, and then and the hypothalamus as well, I should say. And you've got the function of the thalamus. So I will also say that the thalamus, of course, now that I want to use this is going to act up on me again. The thalamus, it should be noted, right, makes up 80% right, of the diencephalon. Right, and also think of it from the perspective of, did you ever cut yourself and not realize it for like 10 minutes, and then all of a sudden you look down and everything starts hurting and you start freaking out, and it dawns on you what has now happened to you. All right, yeah, that's integrating all 3 of these areas into one massive event, and that's kind of what it does. All right, that's kind of what it does. Or hot and cold. Right? You touch something and you're looking at it and it looks cold, but when you touch it, it's actually hot. Yeah, that's the thalamus doing its thing. All right. The hypothalamus, as we've mentioned, or as I've pointed out previously, that is this structure right down here. And again, my pen, I don't know why my pen is acting up, but it is. It contains the mammary bodies, which you're going to see in the dissection that you're going to do in the lab. And it acts as a relay station, if you would, for the olfactory system. Right? So it kind of takes what the olfactory is picking up and conveys it and sends it up into the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus also contains the infundibulum. And the infundibulum is that little stalk that hangs down right in here on coming off of the hypothalamus, and it's what the pituitary gland hangs off of. All right. And what we see here is that the The hypothalamus is the main visceral control center, all right, and really is responsible for the majority of the regulation of homeostasis. Why is that? Well, because the hypothalamus regulates the autonomic nervous system, right, which we have yet to really talk about in detail, but we're going to get into that next week. It initiates physical responses to emotion, right? So the perception of pleasure, fear, rage, circadian rhythms, your sleep cycles, sex drive, right? All of that is regulated through the hypothalamus. Body temperature, sweating and shivering, hunger, thirst, sleep and wake cycles. It also regulates the pituitary gland. And so it controls the endocrine system as well. And so the hypothalamus, um, it's not an understatement to say that the hypothalamus is probably the major regulatory center within the brain. And if you think we're done talking about the hypothalamus, you are going to be sadly mistaken. I apologize now. Um, and so, we're regulating blood pressure, we're regulating cardiac output, we're regulating digestive tract function, we're regulating pupil size, we're regulating everything and anything. You name it, we can link it back to the hypothalamus in one way, shape, form, or another, as you can see on the screen. Um, I will also say that a failure of the hypothalamus to maintain homeostasis is where we see disorders like body wasting, right? Things like bulimia um, and anorexia, right? Where the body's just kind of eating itself and getting smaller and smaller and smaller. That's a loss of homeostatic regulation within the hypothalamus. The opposite of body wasting disease or condition is obesity, right? Where the hypothalamus loses regulatory control over, let's say, the thalamus and the digestive system, and the person, for any number of reasons, is uncontrollably gaining weight. Obesity does not necessarily mean that you just need to stop eating a pizza for dinner every single day. That might have nothing to do with it. It really can be um, hormonally linked and controlled. Um, there's a group of disorders called Men's 1 and Men's 2. All right. And these disorders have to do with the fact that you've got multiple endocrine um, disruption, right? Within the endocrine system, and a lot of that comes back to the hypothalamus. Um, Not being able to sleep at night very often is a hypothalamic regulatory issue. Dehydration, right? Emotional imbalances can be tied to the hypothalamus as well. So you got a lot that goes on there. Um, and then you got the epithalamus, which is really our primary focus here, is the pineal gland, which its primary function is to secrete melatonin. Right? And we know that melatonin is what regulates sleep cycles. So the pineal gland increases its activity. In other words, it secretes more melatonin as the sun starts to go down. And that's what makes you sleepy. This is why during the winter months in the fall, very often you're like exhausted at 6:30. You don't know why. Well, because it gets dark at 5 o'clock. And so what happens? The pineal gland is secreting melatonin, and you're kind of like, it's sleepy night time. All right? It's coming around the corner. So that is the epithalamus. The brainstem is our next region to consider. Again, I'm only giving overviews of this. You're getting a little bit more of the identification part of this within the lab. Brainstem also has three components to it, or three parts: the medulla oblongata, pons, and the midbrain. And if we look at each of these three areas here, I will say that this is the anterior or ventral view. And this is the dorsal view that you're looking at over here. All right, so same structure, just this is from the front and this is from the back, so to speak. But you can see that in purple, right, this is the thalamus that you're looking at up here. Right, this is the thalamus that you're looking at up here. Right, the hypothalamus is the dark purple that you're looking at right here in the middle. Right, the hypothalamus is there in the middle. Right, you can see, because this is the posterior view, you can see the pineal gland. Right, from this view, you do not see the pineal gland from this view here. But then you come into this this shamrock green right here. This is the midbrain. Right. This lighter green, pale green color that you're looking at right here, that's the pons. And then this darker green area that you're looking at right here, right, that's the medulla oblongata. And again, over here, because the pons is only an anterior structure, you're not going to see it necessarily from the posterior view. And so here you're getting a wide view of the midbrain. You're only seeing a little bit of the pons right here, and then you're seeing a rather large area for the medulla oblongata right there. And so that's kind of the breakdown of that. The function-wise, the midbrain regulates and controls the protective mechanisms within the body. So someone throws something at you, right? What do? You flinch, right? Or you throw your hands up and you tilt your head to go ahead and protect your face. Right? That's your midbrain, right? Eye movement, head and neck movement. All right. It also plays a role in pain suppression and fight or flight response. All right. And so we see in that case here, we see regulatory domain over cranial nerves 3 and 4. Right? The oculomotor nerve and the trochlear nerve. By the way, remember both of those nerves, the oculomotor and the trochlear nerves, are directly involved in regulating eye movement. And so they are cranial nerves that are involved in regulating the movement of the muscles involved in the eye. And the other thing I will mention is from the back side, from the posterior side of the midbrain, we see something referred to as the corpora quadrigemina. Right? The corpora quadrigemina. And the corpora quadrigemina has two divisions. It's got a superior vision that we call the superior colliculus. It's got an inferior division that's referred to as the inferior colliculus. The superior colliculus helps to regulate and coordinate visceral reflexes. Or I'm sorry, visual reflexes. All right, so again, this is eye movement. All right, and then the inferior colliculus or colliculi is involved in auditory relay centers, and so you hear something, your brain processes it, and then your eyes respond accordingly. All right, so you hear something, and then you turn your head real quick, and you look to see what it is that you are hearing. So you have a double confirmation. Right, so that's the corpora quadrigemina. Right, that's the corpora quadrigemina. The pons. And by the way, you can see that these cranial nerves are also labeled here for you. Right, so again, the ocular motor nerve, right, cranial nerve 3 is right here, cranial nerve 4 is right there, and again, this is the midbrain. All right, this is the midbrain, and this is also the trochlear nerve over here. All right, so remember, the cranial nerves are in pairs, so you've got a pair of oculomotor nerves and a pair of cranial nerves right there, and again, both of those are associated with the midbrain. The pons sees another set of cranial nerves that it is responsible for. All right, so the trigeminal nerve, which is right here. All right. And the abducens and facial nerves, which are down here. This is the abducens nerve, cranial nerve 6. And cranial nerve 7 is this guy. Oh, I'm sorry. Cranial nerve 8, I got ahead of, or 7, I'm sorry, is right here. And right here, and that's the facial nerves there. Right, so again, we've got the trigeminal nerve right here. Right, we've got the abducens nerve, which is right here. And then you've got the facial nerve, which is right here. Right, you got the facial nerve, which is right there. And so they're all, they all originate within the pons. Function-wise, the pons aids the medulla oblongata with respiration. And so it works with the medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata regulates cardiac output. And so as you increase cardiac output, you've got more blood going to the lungs, which means your lungs also have to change the rhythm in which they function. And that's where the pons comes into play at. It also serves as a relay station, if you would, or intermediary between the medulla oblongata and the cerebrum, as well as the cerebellum and the cerebrum. And so we have some additional nerve tracts that will go through that area in response to that. And then we have the medulla oblongata. All right, we have the medulla oblongata, which I will pause and play for you the famous clip from Waterboy on the medulla oblongata. Here it is. Enjoy.
So, why you pick this class anyway? It's pretty hard.
Oh, beautiful view.
All right.
All right. All right. Y'all shut up now. Now, last week, we talked about the physiology of the animal brain as it pertains to aggression. Now, is there anyone here that can tell me why most alligators are abnormally aggressive?
I know the answer to this question. Raise your hand.
Anybody? Anyone? Yes or you, sir?
Mama says that alligators are ornery because they got all them teeth but no toothbrush.
Your mama said alligators are ornery because they got all them teeth and no toothbrush. Wow. Anybody else? Yes, sir, you, sir.
Alligators are aggressive because of an enlarged medulla oblongata. It's the sector of the brain which controls aggressive behavior.
That is correct. The medulla oblongata.
But Mama said...
The medulla oblongata is where anger, jealousy, and aggression come from. Now, is there anybody here can tell me where happiness comes from?
No.
Anyone?
Oh.
All right. Let's hear what Mama has to say on the subject.
Mama say that happiness is from magic rays of sunshine that come down when you're feeling blue.
Well, folks, Mama's wrong again.
No, Colonel Sanders, you're wrong. Mama's right.
All wrong. Mama's right. Mama's right. Something wrong with his medulla oblongata.
It's okay to fight back. Coach Klein said I could. Mr. Coach Klein said I could. It's fine.
And so now that you've had that little bit of enjoyment, reflection, there's some things that are inherently wrong with that clip. Fear and rage is not regulated within the medulla oblongata, even within alligators. We know that is the job of the hypothalamus. But the medulla oblongata does respond to fear and rage, as well as a whole host of other things, because it is the cardiovascular control center. And so the medulla oblongata does regulate cardiac output. Right? right? How fast does that heart actually beat? And also because of that, it is also a center of respiratory control. It's also a center of respiratory control. And so we have something called the ventral respiratory control center, and that is housed within the medulla oblongata. And then we see other various non-important type of regulatory mechanisms within the medulla oblongata. In other words, these guys up here, the cardiovascular regulatory control center and the respiratory regulatory control center, right, both of these are what we consider to be vital reflexes. And I think we can all understand why these are vital. Right? Whereas these other things that are listed down below are considered non-vital. Right? So vomiting, hiccuping, swallowing, coughing, sneezing, those types of things are, while regulated from the medulla oblongata, are not considered to be vital reflexes. And as with the previous centers of the brainstem, arising from the medulla oblongata, we see cranial nerves 8, 9, 10, and 12. And so we see 8, 9, 10, and 12 arising from the medulla oblongata. And so where are we looking at right down here? Well, we are looking at the vestibulocochlear nerve, or otherwise known as the auditory nerve. All right, that is cranial nerve 8. All right, cranial nerve 9 is the glossopharyngeal nerve, right here. All right, cranial nerve 10 is my favorite nerve. That is the vagus nerve, right there. All right, so you can see that giving rise. Cranial nerve 12. Cranial nerve 12 is the hypoglossal nerve, right here. Again, that's going to be a nerve that's going to be involved in swallowing. All right. And so we see that. And you notice we skipped cranial nerve 11, the accessory nerve down here, and that's because yes, it has roots in the medulla oblongata, but it also extends down into the spinal cord a little bit too, which is why it's not listed in that group, right? Because it's not specific to the medulla oblongata. It kind of shares it with the spinal cord that you see right there. All right. And last but not least for this video, we have the cerebrum. I'm sorry, we have the cerebellum. Sorry. And the cerebellum is, again, this region right back here, inferior to the cerebrum, posterior to the brainstem, and we've got this area that is known as the cerebellum. And the cerebellum also has gray matter and white matter. Except in true anatomical fashion, we do not refer to it as gray matter and white matter. That would be boring. The gray matter is what we refer to as folia. And so you can see that gray matter right there, folia. And that's Greek or Latin for tree-like, all right, or leaves. Right? Think of folia, foliage, like a leaf. Right, whereas the white matter that you see coming in here, right, we refer to that as the arbor vitae, and the arbor vitae literally means tree of life. Right, and so that kind of looks like, if you tilt your head and look at that sideways, it kind of looks like a tree trunk with branches coming up and off of it. And the function of the cerebellum is skeletal muscle control. All right, and so when we talk about regulating skeletal muscle movement, we're talking about location, speed, direction of the limbs. It knows where the arms are in relation to the legs. So think of hand-eye coordination. All right, that is the domain of the cerebellum. Not that anybody in any of one of my classes would ever experience this, because you are all upstanding, fine citizens of Poco. Um, but let's say you have a friend who was pulled over and maybe had a little too much to drink and is given a sobriety test on the side of the road. What they're doing is they're really testing for cerebellar function. And so that whole you put one foot in front of the other and walk in a straight line. That's overseeing location, speed, and direction of the limbs. When they have to put your hands out to your side, fingertips pointing, and bring one hand in at a time and touch your nose. All right, that again is direction of the limbs, location. Does your fingertip know where your nose is, and can you subconsciously regulate and control that? That is the job of the cerebellum. And with that, we have come to the end of video 2 of the brain. Our third video in this series is going to be looking at some other additional structures, things such as the meninges, all right, things such as the ventricles and their role in cerebral spinal fluid. We're going to talk about the blood-brain barrier a little bit. And then I'll have some images for you too that you can practice labeling as well. And so that'll be the third video. And so with that said, keep reviewing, go back over, listen to your segments here, make sure you can answer the questions that I've embedded into the video. And in case you haven't known or don't know what's coming next, I'll catch you on the flip side.